Hey, good morning there. Today, I want to talk about, actually, today I'm going to be a little nerdy, talking about psychotherapy today and I would say, probably some of the more technical aspects of being a mental health provider. And this is also true as a play therapist. Some of those more technical things that we need to be able to develop proficiency in, and that is clinical decision making. I know it sounds kind of nerdy, probably sounds really nerdy, but I'm not going to lie. I love talking about these nerdy things. So, and I think probably the reason I love talking about these nerdy things is because they really are important. And in my mind, why do something halfway? I don't even know if that's in my DNA to do something halfway. I always like to try to do my best. So here's what I always say, especially to new people, new professionals coming up in the profession. We can strive for excellence, but we don't want to get into perfectionism. There is a difference between excellence and perfectionism. Sometimes that's a very fine line, and I'm constantly having to rein myself in that way and go more towards, for me, what is excellence. And I think that's important for all play therapists to think about is, for me, what is excellence and what does that look like, my version of excellence. And in my opinion, if that's the kind of conversation we're having and even thinking about with ourselves, one of that um, part of that conversation is thinking about, well, what is clinical decision making, and what is clinical decision making in play therapy in particular. And so that is what we are going to talk about today. If you are joining me live, I would love to know who's here. Post your name in the comments, where you're from, what population you work with, favorite play therapy modality, if you're using play therapy, or if you're more in the expressive arts field, what expressive arts modalities are you using? And I would love to know what your questions are. Please feel free to comment. I go live every week at 7 a.m. Pacific time here in the United States. And I talk about all things play therapy and expressive arts. I go live on LinkedIn, on my YouTube channel, and in my Facebook group for mental health professionals using play therapy and expressive arts with children, adolescents, and families. Carla is in the house. So Carla does consultation with me. Hey, Carla, I'm so excited. You just made my day, Carla, that you're joining today. Um, Anyways, I just lost my train of thought. I got so excited when I saw your name, Carla. Um, and I also go live on my Instagram channel. So if you're interested in my Facebook group and you are a mental health professional using play therapy with expressive arts, using play therapy with children, adolescents, and families and also expressive arts, my Facebook group is called Play and Expressive Arts Therapy Playground. You do have to answer all the questions. There are a few questions. So you have to answer all the questions in order to be admitted into the group. So just make sure you answer all the questions. All right. So today I want to talk about clinical decision making. And how does that apply in play therapy? So clinical decision making in the mental health field is not something we talk a lot about outside. Maybe you got it in graduate school. I don't think I went to graduate school 30 years ago, so I kind of don't remember all the nitty gritty details of things. They all kind of get mished in with what I've learned over the last 30 years. But I don't remember talking too much about specifically clinical decision making. And to be honest, because I'm actually doing a series now, creating a self-paced training series, And it's called, the training series itself is called Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Excellence. And so there are different courses in that series that I've been releasing one at a time. The first one is already out, which is called Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Foundations. The next one is the one I've been doing a lot of research with. So whenever I do put together trainings, I always like to go through the research and see what the latest research is saying. And I'll even look for some of the most up-to-date books and some of the experts are writing. And this was not something I found a lot of. I definitely didn't find anything in the play therapy arena. If it's out there, I didn't find it. I would love to know if it's out there. But I didn't find a lot about this. In fact, I found one professional book that on clinical decision making, and it was through the APA Association for American Psychological Association, and you could also get it on Amazon. But I couldn't. There were no hard copies. Even I had to get a Kindle version, which I like having a book to look through. But because I wanted it and I was willing to pay the $70 for it, I got the Kindle version, but there really wasn't much out there. There is some research. A lot of the research I looked at had to do with bias, which that I found that interesting as well, because that's not something we talk about a lot as well. What are the biases that we really need to be looking at and being aware of when we're going through that decision-making process for treatment, when we're conceptualizing the treatment, which is the issue. I mean, that's the episode I did last week. So if you're interested in case conceptualization in play therapy, you can find that the replay of that episode that I did last week. If you are in my Facebook group, you can go into the featured section in my Facebook group. I pin all the replays in there. If you're on Instagram, you can go into my grid. I think it's kind of easy to find them in there. On LinkedIn, it's probably better for you to go over to YouTube, on my YouTube channel, and click on the live tab. And if you prefer YouTube over Facebook or Instagram, you can hop over there to my YouTube channel, which is Kathy Spooner, Renewing Hearts Consulting. Okay, first, I have to take a momentary break. If you hear weird sounds coming from the live stream, be aware my dogs are in the room with me. And so my dog Lily, she's the little one. She usually scratches at the door. But anyway, she hears me calling her name. Lily is roaming around the room and getting into all kinds of things and scratching. Luna is the bigger one, and you may hear Luna. If you hear any loud kind of moaning sounds behind me, it is my dog making, like, rolling around on her back and kind of rolling all over the place on her back. So any weird sounds you hear, those are my dogs in the background. So getting back on track. So when I was in preparing for this course that I have coming out in March, which is called Getting Grounded in Clinical Conceptualization in Play Therapy, in that course, I went through case conceptualization and what does that look like in play therapy. And then there's also a module in the course on clinical decision making, because in my mind, clinical decision making and case conceptualization go hand in hand. So what is clinical decision making? Clinical decision making combines your expertise, so the training that you have gone through, the consultation that you get, and how you take that information and apply it from session to session to session. Basically, you're using your analytical skills to get a sense of what's going on in the session. That's where your expertise and training comes in. So you take that information, you analyze what's going on in the session you get a sense of where your client is in that moment in the treatment process. Plus, you're kind of analyzing what they need to do to get all the way through the treatment process. You're identifying and kind of hypothesizing about any potential barriers, because you're going to have to do that decision making to figure out what needs to happen to effectively and successfully help your client navigate through any of those potential barriers. A big one in play therapy that I hear coming up. So I've been in the mental health field, child and adolescent mental health field for 30 years now. I've been doing supervision, play therapy supervision, consultation for, I think it's the last 15, maybe a little bit more, but around 15 years. And here, and training as well. So all of the trainings that I do, all of the consultation that I do, even in the currently like doing online consultation that I do now with people, here are the things that I keep hearing over and over. These are some of the barriers that come up that you have to make decisions about. How does that impact your client's treatment, and then what needs to happen to successfully get them to the treatment completion. So one of the biggest barriers that has to be addressed is what happens if I can't get parents involved. Like I try to talk to them, but I can't get them scheduled, or my clients don't show up and they're regularly not coming, or I can only get one parent in. Parents are divorced or separated, but the other one I can't get in touch with, or maybe my client's not making any progress. I don't know what's going on in the play therapy process. Those are typical ones that come up. Usually when I ask about, is your client making any progress, and I start asking about parent involvement, not always, but a lot of times what the barrier is they're not really involved in the process, and parents are the therapeutic agents of change for their children. Therapists are in a way, but therapists, you're not in their lives the whole time. Parents or guardians, they're the ones that are in their lives for their duration. They're the ones their kids use for support. They're the ones that go to the school to advocate or find out what's going on with their child. They're the ones out there that their child is using. And from an attachment standpoint, you want to really help that secure attachment develop. So for a lot of reasons, and I go a lot, we talk about this a lot in my supervision groups. Carla can attest to that. We do the individual play therapy consultation. These are the barriers that come up, and you have to make decisions about what's going to happen and how to help your client get through that. Like if your client's not showing up, we know that they're not going to make progress in treatment, because in order to make progress, you have to come. So there can be any number of reasons why they're not coming. Part of that clinical decision-making process is figuring out what's going on, the reason they're not coming, having a conversation with parents about it, doing some collaborative problem solving, helping parents and guardians to understand if this is part of the problem, because it's not always. What will happen if they don't come consistently, that they're not going to make progress. And we know that's the case, because in order to facilitate change, they have to be there. It's kind of the same thing I'll use the analogy of sports or getting healthy and working out. In order for you to see a difference, you can't just eat healthy, a couple days a week, or exercise maybe a couple times a month and expect you're going to achieve your goal. You have to commit to the process and eating healthy every day. exercising at least three times a week, maybe more, whatever your schedule allows, but you have to do it consistently in order to see the progress. Well, it's the same in mental health. It's the same in play therapy. In order to see that change, you have to make that commitment. And so the clinical decision making is, how do you have those conversations with parents? What's your theory model that you're using? And how is that being applied in the therapy process from session to session to session? So one of the other things that comes up a lot that involves clinical decision making, as well as case conceptualization, is you're using your play therapy theory model. And then, so there's theory and then there's application. How do you take the theory and apply it from session to session to session? Well, that's going to involve some decision making. Here's what my theory model says. And then how do I apply that? What does that theory model look like with this client? And what does it look like with that client? And here's the other thing. Will this theory model work with that client? These are all of the decisions that come up in the play therapy process. And so I wanted to read this quote. So that book that I mentioned earlier is called Clinical Decision Making in Mental Health Practice, and it's edited by Jeffrey Magnavita. I hope I pronounced that right. Anyways, because part of that clinical decision making is you're also recognizing what your bias is. And we all have bias. And there's lots of different kind of bias. Apparently, I found that out too. There's like tons of different kind of bias. And for some of them, we know one of the big things, like I've been in social work, we've been talking about cultural bias and cultural competence. That was the term he used a long time ago. There's a lot of different ones now. Cultural humility. The one I recently learned about, which I actually like, is cultural intelligence, which to me involves decision making. So how are you even looking at cultural issues, and how is that? So that's the case conceptualization. How does culture play into my client's problems? What are the strengths that we can use from their culture? And then the decision-making process is, if I come to any barriers and they're related to culture, how am I going to address that? What are those barriers and how am I going to use them? But also clinical decision-making is, let me look at the strengths from culture and how am I going to utilize those strengths and support those strengths, because that's the resiliency building. How am I going to help clients and families really tap into that and use that? How do I support that and help my clients use that to successfully complete treatment? So here's the quote. It says, bias is inherent in just about every part of our lives and is often unacknowledged, but influential, but an influential part of clinical practice. Understanding our propensity for bias will go a long way toward enhancing our clinical decision making. And if to me, that's a really important part of doing that decision making, is not only utilizing our expertise and helping us tap into that, but the other part of that is how do I have any biases that are influencing my decision making? And if so, how are they influencing my decision making? And is that helpful or not helpful? So I'll give a personal example, because I have to watch this with myself all of the time. So you can hear my dog Luna. I have two boys, and they're young adults now, out on their own, and they both have ADHD. I grew up in a home with a sibling who was not diagnosed, but there's not a doubt in my mind my sibling has ADHD, knowing what I know about ADHD and what it was like living with someone who was ADHD. And back then, my parents didn't know, and it was kind of chaos, to be honest. If you live with a sibling who's got a big H and nobody knows how to handle it, it can be a little overwhelming for the siblings. So this is part of my bias, right? And now I have children who have ADHD. They have different versions of ADHD. The likelihood I have ADHD and grew up with ADHD is probably pretty high based on what I know about working memory. I just learned how to kind of navigate it. So this is my bias. I lived with it. I grew up with it. I know what it looks like. My professional development. I know what ADHD looks like. So what I have to be careful of is that when I see certain symptoms, I don't go straight to, oh, that's ADHD. I have to kind of recognize, oh, okay, I have this bias. Now, what am I going to do with it? I can use the helpfulness of my bias because I kind of know, I've lived with it. I know what it looks like. I know what it feels like, that kind of thing. But I also know that I can be overconfident and have overconfidence bias. And there's another one too. There's a few different kind. So I have to be aware of those and then take a step back and then kind of go through all my differential diagnoses process. And then I also have to be aware of kind of getting frustrated or anything that might influence my decision making because of my bias that's going to not help my clients get the best outcomes that they can in treatment. So it's not that do we have bias? We do. All of us do. And it's kind of like, now there's a lot of focus, which I think is good, that we're looking at cultural aspects of things. And they're all different kind of culture, spiritual culture, sexuality culture, gender identity culture, race and ethnicity culture. All of these come with culture to them. And how are we recognizing our own biases about that, managing that, as well as making ourselves more familiar with culture if we're not familiar with it. So in a nutshell, that's what clinical decision making is. It is your expertise as well as how you're analyzing the situation and making decisions about what needs to happen on a day-by-day basis, on a client-by-client basis, through to successful completion of treatment, and having to be aware of what bias that is. So why is that important? Why is clinical decision making important in the play therapy process? And I've kind of already talked a little bit about that, which is it's important because it's what helps our clients get all the way through the treatment process, that we are honing our clinical decision-making skills. We're using our expertise. We're, if you're in that professional development, that like early part of play therapy, then you're talking with your play therapy supervisor or consultant, and you're having discussions about what's going on. And in my play therapy group, and even when I do individual play therapy consultation, one of the things that we do in my online play therapy consultation is we will analyze what's going on. We'll analyze what are the symptoms. We'll analyze, okay, what's going on with clients that they aren't making progress, and then do some decision making about how to help them get through that barrier to successful completion. And we're looking at what those barriers are, and we're looking at some of the things that may be going on that are influencing our bias about what's going on with our clients. So when we're applying, when we're in clinical decision making, when we're applying a play therapy model, you have to recognize, based on that theoretical model, what's going on in the session, and then you're making decisions about how your client is going to progress and if it's working. Because if you're trained in a play therapy model, I mean, here's the nice thing about being trained in more than one. And whatever one you're trained in, you want to make sure you develop some proficiency in the specific model. But most of us are trained in more than one. Most of us use an integrated approach. And I would say that's true in the general mental health field as well. One of the things that we have to figure out is this theory model working for my client? Part of that decision making is, am I applying it the way it's supposed to be applied? What's my proficiency? What's my skill level in that particular model? And how am I using that model to help my client get all the way through the treatment process? But some models don't work well with every client. And for example, so this is my opinion, I would say my default model is child-centered play therapy. That's the model I was trained in. My supervisor was a child-centered play therapist. And so when I went through the play therapy consultation, that's the one I learned. So when my clinical decision making is typically when I am working with a younger child, like 3 or 4 or 5, 6, 7, 8, that's typically the one that I start with, child-centered play therapy. My experience has been when they get a little older, like around 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, child-centered play therapy doesn't work so well for them. And here's how I base that decision on, not to use it with them, because they get irritated. They get so irritated with the tracking in the sessions that it becomes them being angry at me, which is not what the theory model is about. The theory model is about using therapeutic self to form that relationship, because that's a key part of the theory to help your client move through the treatment process. But if they're constantly irritated with my funny talking, which is AKA tracking, then it's not going to work. And so for those clients, I have to use a different model. I use a little bit more of an integrated. The other model that I use is I use an attachment and neuroscience lens in the treatment process, especially when I'm conceptualizing what's going on and I'm using more integrated interventions, like maybe a cognitive behavioral intervention, or I'm using more of a psychodynamic type of intervention through Santre or art. So then I'm kind of grounding it in attachment and neuroscience to help me make those decisions about what's going on in the session. This is where in child-centered play therapy, I would be looking at what are the themes that are going on. So I'm recognizing themes. That is going to help me figure out, okay, where are they in the treatment process and what do they still need to do in order to get through all of the phases. And I'm also making decisions about how parents are going to be involved in the treatment process. And I make that mandatory. I explain that all up front. So these are all the decisions. And so through the play therapy process, you're also recognizing what the barriers are to progress and figuring out the best way to address those. So having conversations with parents, or sometimes that means you even do some consultation with a neutral person who's not in the thick of it, to take a step back and recognize, okay, what are the themes that we're seeing in the play therapy process? What are the clinical issues, and how do I define those clinical issues based on my theory model? And then based on my theory model and how I define those issues, then using my theory model, what do I need to do to help my client successfully move through those. And so you're applying a lot of those core competencies that are core competencies of play therapy. So you are applying those tracking skills, reflecting feelings, limit setting. Do I need to set a limit? Do I not need to set a limit? What happens if I set the limit? What happens if I don't set the limit? How do I handle it if I set the limit and my client doesn't respond very well? How do I set limits with parents? What happens if they get upset with me? How do I handle that? How am I pacing the sessions? Am I going too slow? Am I going too fast? If my client has hit kind of a deep issue, you typically slow down. They typically need to go a little slower while they're working through some of those more intense things that they need to work through. So that's the pacing. I'm identifying themes. I'm identifying dynamics, and then I'm using that information to help my clients move through the process. So those are all for play therapy in particular. This is why developing those core competencies is important. But the other thing that you're developing is your clinical decision-making skill building. Like, how are you making those decisions? And are you making those decisions? And when you're making those decisions, and I would say also doing your case conceptualization, are you recognizing your bias? And what are you doing with that? That's the other piece that's really, really important. So that is it for today. I want to check my comments there. Okay. So if you find this information helpful, please feel free to share it, and across your social media, please feel free to like it. And again, if you are interested, I go live every week, so you can catch me same place, same time every week, talking about different things. And I did want to share a little bit about my trainings that I have coming up, as well as Play Therapy Academy. So Play Therapy Academy is my group consultation program. In Play Therapy Academy, we typically meet twice a month. We do live group supervision, consultation, in that we have 2 people who are staffing cases. And so we're going through that clinical decision-making process as a group, and also kind of using the brilliance of the group to get ideas and kind of help build those skills and get different examples of what different things look like. And in Play Therapy Academy are my Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Excellence self-paced courses. That's part of Play Therapy Academy. But if you're not in Play Therapy Academy, then those Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Excellence courses are available on a course-by-course basis. You can buy them separately. Right now, the one that I have available is Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Foundations. So I think that's part of our professional development, professional identity as play therapists, is to really understand what are the core components of play therapy. What's the history of play therapy? Because that's our roots. That's how we came to be how we are. As social workers, we learn the history of social work. As school psychologists, we learn the history of school psychologists. As counselors, we learn the history of counseling, because that's what grounds us. That's how we understand how we came to be as a profession. That's what sets our profession apart from other disciplines. So what sets a social worker apart from a clinical psychologist? This is part of that process. What are the core competencies of play therapy that are different than maybe drama therapy or art therapy? So that's Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Foundations. That one's available now. If you're interested, you can hop over to my website at RRH. Sorry, I'm going to put my little banner up here on my on Facebook, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. I have these little banners, but I can't do that in Instagram, so you don't get to see my little banners. If you're watching on Instagram, you can go over to my bio. There's a link in the bio that'll take you over to my website and the training. If you're not on Instagram and you're watching me on my other platforms, you can go. My website is rrhcounseling.com/courses. The course that's available now is Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Foundations. The course that's coming out next month in March is called Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Getting Grounded in Play Therapy Case Conceptualization. So that's the one that's going to be available next month. It'll have that case conceptualization skills specifically in play therapy. Regardless of what theory model you're using, there are still some core competency skills in case conceptualization and also that clinical decision making, regardless of what play therapy model that you're using. And then your play therapy model will then even further influence those two processes for you. So if you are interested in Play Therapy Academy, I do have another cohort that's opening up. So I do have Play Therapy Academy currently has some openings. If you're interested in that, you can hop over to my website, go on to the supervision consultation page, and then you can read a little bit about it. Also, you can schedule a free 30-minute video meeting with me where we talk about Play Therapy Academy to see if it's a good fit for you. So if you're interested in that, you can do that as well. If you're also interested in individual play therapy consultation, you can also schedule that 30-minute meeting with me and we could talk about individual as well. All righty. Just a quick recap before we go. Clinical decision-making is essentially how you conceptualize the roots of your client's problems and navigate through that treatment process, analyzing and solving problems to help your clients overcome whatever it is that is bringing them to your office. And then in play therapy, this involves using whatever play therapy theory model that you have learned and you're gaining expertise in, and then you're deciding how you're going to apply that theoretical model to help your client from session to session to session, making sense of what's going on in the process, and then helping them work through any barriers that may come up. All righty. And if you are watching, I'll post links in the comments. If you're watching on Instagram, you can just pop over to my bio. On Facebook and LinkedIn, I will post a link to my courses as well as information about Play Therapy Academy. And I will see you next time. Bye.